Section 31 of John Inglesant, A Romance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. John Inglesant, A Romance, by Joseph Henry Shorthouse. Chapter 21, Part 2. The following morning the cardinal expressed his sorrow that the business which took him to Rome was of so important a nature that it obliged him to proceed without delay. He approved of the advice that Inglesant had already received, and recommended him to proceed to Florence with Don Agostino, as he was so near, so that he might not have his journey for nothing, and might see the city under very favourable circumstances. Inglesant was the more ready to agree to this as he wished to see as much of Italy as he could, unshackled by the company of the great, which, in the uncertain state of health both of his body and mind, was inexpressibly burdensome to him. He had already seen in this last journey a great deal of the distress and bad government which prevailed everywhere, and he wished to make himself acquainted, in some measure, with the causes of this distress before going to Rome. As he rode through the beautiful plains, he had been astonished at the few inhabitants, and at the wretchedness of the few. Italy had suffered greatly in her commerce by the introduction of Indian silks into Europe. Some of her most flourishing cities had been depopulated, their nobles ruined, and long streets of neglected palaces, deserted and left in magnificent decay, presented a melancholy though romantic spectacle. But bad government, and the oppression and waste caused by the accumulated wealth and idleness of the innumerable religions orders, had more to do in running the prosperity of the country than any commercial changes, and proofs of this fact met the traveller's eye on every hand. It seemed to Inglesant that it was very necessary that he should satisfy himself upon some of these points before becoming involved in any political action in the country, and he shrank from entering Rome at present, and from attaching himself to any great man or any party. In a country where the least false step is fatal, and may plunge a man in irretrievable ruin, or consign him to the dungeons of the Holy Office, it is certainly prudent in a stranger to be wary of his first steps. Having communicated these resolutions to his friend, the two young men, on their arrival at Florence, took lodgings privately in the Piazza del Santo Spirito, and occupied their first time for some days in viewing the city, and visiting the churches and museums, as though they had been simply travellers from curiosity. Inglesant believed the Italian to be in Rome, which was a farther reason for delaying his journey there. He believed that he was going to engage in some terrible conflict, and he wished to prepare himself by an acquaintance with every form of life in this strange country. This singular scenes that strike a stranger in Italy, the religious processions, the character and habits of the poorer classes, their ideas of moral obligation, their ecclesiastical and legal government, all appeared to him of importance to his future fate. As he was perfectly unacquainted with the person of his enemy, there was a sort of vague expectation, not to say dread, always present to his mind, for though he fancied that it would be in Rome that he should find the Italian, yet it was not all the impossible that at any moment it might be in Florence, or in the open country he might be the object of a murderous attack. His person was doubtless known to the murderer of his brother, and he thus walked everywhere in the full light, while his enemy was hidden in the dark. These ideas were seldom absent from his mind, and the image of the murderer was almost constantly before his eyes. Often, as some marked figure crossed his path, he started and watched the retreating form, wondering whether the object of his morbid dread was before him. Often, as the uncovered corpse was borne along the streets, the thought struck him that perhaps his fear and his search were alike needless, and that before him on the bier, harmless and strewn with flowers, lay his terrible foe. These thoughts naturally prevented his engaging unrestrainedly in the pursuits of his age and rank, and he often let Don Agostino go alone into the gay society which was open to them in Florence. In pursuit of his intention, Inglesant took every opportunity, without incurring remark, of associating with the lower orders, and learning their habits, traditions, and tone of thought. He chose streets which led through the poorer parts of the town, and passing from one part to another, and in this way, and in the course of his visits to different churches and religious houses, he was able to converse with the common people without attracting attention. In excursions into the country, whether on parties of pleasure or for sport, he was also able to throw himself in the same way among the peasantry. Under the pretence of shooting quails, he passed several days in more than one country village, and had become acquainted with several of the cures, from whom he gained much information respecting the habits of the people, and of their ideas of crime and of lawful revenge. One of these cures, a man of penetration and intellect, strongly advised him to see Venus before he went to Rome. "Venus," he said to him, "is the sink of all wickedness, and, as such, it is desirable that you should see the people there, and mix with them. Besides, as such, it is not at all unlikely that the men you seek may be found there." "What is the cause of this wickedness?" asked Inglesant. "There are several causes," replied the priest. "One is that the Holy Office there is under the control of the state, and is therefore almost always powerless. Wickedness and license of all kinds are therefore unrestrained." Inglesant mentioned this advice to John Agostino, and his desire to proceed to Venus. But as the other was unwilling to leave Florence till the termination of the carnival, which was now approaching, he was obliged to postpone his intention for some weeks. On one of the opening days of the carnival, Inglesant had accompanied Don Agostino to a magnificent supper given by the Grand Duke at his villa and gardens at the Poggio Imperiale, some distance outside the Romana gate. Inglesant had succeeded in throwing off for a time his gloomy thoughts, and had taken his share in the gaiety of the festival. But the effort and the excitement had produced a reaction, and towards morning he had succeeded in detaching himself from the company, many of whom, the banquet being over, were strolling in the lovely gardens in the cool air which preceded dawn, and he returned alone to the city. As this was his frequent custom, his absence did not surprise Don Agostino, who scarcely noticed his friend's eccentricities. End of section 31. Read by Elijah Fisher.